Densetsu no Starfy, or The Legend of Starfy, or something along those lines anyway. It's a game where you would probably immediately recognize the main character, but you might not be entirely sure why. Sure, there was a game in the series that did come out in North America, but it's actually kind of a hard to find one. I've been looking for it for a while and still haven't found one, but while we only ended up getting 1/5 of the number of games in the series total, he wouldn't be famous for any of that. No, we'd actually know him best as appearing as a assist trophy in one of the Smash Brothers games. I don't know, they all kind of bleed together for me. But this is yet another Japanese game that's really only known in North America because of Smash. And honestly, I wish we'd known about this guy a little sooner because it's pretty good. Now, the story follows Starfy, or Starfy, again, it depends how you want to translate it, but he's a prince in a cloud kingdom above the sky where he rules with an iron fist over the plebs of the ocean. However, he's also very, very clumsy, and one day drops a magical urn-type dealie down into the drink, what destroys the entire world. And now he has to go and fix everything before those sea-dwelling plebs make fun of him too much, because now he has to live in the sea until he fixes everything. There's actually quite a lot of personality and depth to the story itself, near as I can tell, because there's quite a lot of cutscenes involving each of the independent characters, and there's a little bit of character growth. Again, from what I can figure out, it's still entirely in Japanese, so if you can read Japanese, you'll get a lot more out of the story, but there's still enough of the plot given just through pantomime and everything that you can kind of figure out what's going on as you go. And it's a relatively well-told story. Well, for what it is, anyway. And while the story is relatively competent, even if you can't understand it, the gameplay really is what shines through. It's a platformer that takes place underwater, for the most part, which immediately sounds horrifying because I know I'm right there with you. Water levels are just terrible. This game actually gets it pretty well down. And even though it follows a fairly basic control scheme, he's got a pretty deep repertoire for a very simple platforming character. Underwater, he can use the D-pad to swim around in all directions, push blocks to get them out of the way, jump both out of water and on land, as well as duck, run, and probably his signature move, spinning. Yes, Starfy's ultimate be-all, end-all, alpha and omega attack is a pirouette, which is a little awkward because you basically have to be inside your opponent to hit them, but what makes it a little bit more awkward than that is, well, if you remember ever using him in Smash, he can get dizzy. And if he's dizzy, he stops moving altogether. You lose all control over him, which actually ends up being kind of an interesting little strategic choice in terms of how you progress, because you need to use the spin attack to defeat enemies as well as destroy obstacles. But at the same time, if you get dizzy, well, suddenly you're really, really open to attack, but also you can't progress, and also it's really easy to get swarmed, so you kind of have to pick your moments to actually attack with this guy. Instead of charging at the enemy, jumping on everyone's head like other platforming heroes, this guy has to be played a little bit more strategically. And when he's on land, well, he gets one extra ability, gliding. And when used in conjunction with running, he can get pretty much anywhere he would ever need to be. Yeah, seriously, this little guy, he's incredibly versatile, and that actually makes the actual platforming quite an enjoyable experience, because not only are the controls pretty tight, but there's at least enough jumping over wide gaps and everything to satisfy your platforming urges, as opposed to simply, jump to platform, jump to platform, jump to platform. Instead, this time it's, okay, swim, push this thing aside, pirouette around this one guy, jump out of the water, glide over to that platform, run, then duck to slide under something, and Bob's your uncle, end of level. See? This guy's got the moves. There's nothing that's overly complex, it's not overly difficult, the bosses are basically a complete joke, but every area feels different, every level feels different, and there's kind of a plus and a minus to this. The good news is every level feels unique, every level is well thought out, well designed, and really fun to play, but there's only like 8 levels. If you're someone who likes a long game, this game might not necessarily be for you. That said, the individual levels are pretty long. I remember it taking about 15, maybe 20 minutes to get through 1 or 2 levels, so You can get through quite a fair bit of the game pretty quick if you rush it, but you really should be collecting all the little orbs and stuff, because there's quite a lot of collectibles in this game. There are these orbs, which ultimately unlock a progressing Polaroid group shot of the entire cast of characters, as well as treasures you can go search for and unlock. Now, I couldn't find any of these personally, and as I understand, they only show up after you've beaten the game and you can go back, but still, there's a little bit more gameplay added once you beat the game, which is good, because you're going to do it relatively quickly if you really just want to rush through. That said, if you do, I think you're kind of missing the point, because ultimately, while it's not a long game, it's a really fun and enjoyable game, and the platforming is just great. So maybe take your time with this one. The presentation to Densetsu no Starfy is fantastic. For a game where you'd think you'd be underwater for most of the time, I gotta admit, I was really surprised when I got to an ice level. Seriously, that came out of nowhere. And then going into a whale. And the levels are just varied and cute and clever. The individual characters are great and well designed. Even the enemies are fantastic. The animation is tremendous. I love the various different sprites, like Starfy stressed out running animation. Just something about that just screams so much personality packed into these small pixels. And seriously, for a game that should be entirely underwater, you shouldn't have this much variance. Damn impressive. And it likes to do that sort of classic Kirby thing of individual transitions between levels being shown in sort of like an actual animated form. Sort of like feeling like you're on one continuous adventure, as opposed to level A taking place in a completely different planet than level B just because we can't figure out how we got there. I appreciate the visual storytelling. And the audio design is pretty tremendous as well. I'm not gonna lie though, the sound is well done. It's very, very good. Weirdly enough, the most memorable song to me, because it's been a few days since I've last played this, and the only thing that immediately jumps out to me is the pre-boss fight music, which is like this weird, calm, underwater, yet still kind of creepy music. There's just something both soothing and unnerving about it. And honestly, while I can't remember many of the other songs, the rest of the sound design was pretty good. So, you know what? I'm going to give this thing an entire big plus for presentation. Now, if you want to get a copy of Densetsu no Starfy / The Legend of Starfy, well, it shouldn't cost you too much, as Japanese imports on the Game Boy Advance tend to be. In fact, most Japanese imports tend to be pretty cheap. This guy should cost you about $10 to $15. Keep in mind, it is pretty short, so you might want to try and grab the other two sequels this had on the Game Boy Advance, which cost more or less the same as well. I got all three in a bundle for about $25, so I saved a little bit of money, and given the brevity of this game, getting the extra ones definitely helps flesh out the rest of the series. That said, if you want something in English, we did get the legendary Starfy, the 5th game in the series, I believe, on the DS. But I've been having trouble tracking this one down. It might be uncommon, although I don't think it's worth very much because I just don't think people know too much about this game. That said, this game is fantastic, and while I only own the Game Boy Advance games, I really hope to get the DS games in the future because having played all of them for varying lengths, they're all tremendous. They're very, very samey, of course, but sort of like the perfect import game because there's basically no language barrier. It's just ready to pick up and play. There's tons of personality, spot-on platforming, and just great characters, and a lot of personality crammed into this game. So if you've been looking into importing for your Game Boy Advance, you might want to check out the Densetsu no Starfy trilogy on the Game Boy Advance, and if you want the DS ones, well, there's 2 there as well, 1 in English. But no matter what, from my experience in the series, it's all just going to be fun, well-made platforming goodness. And in the end, this game may be a little soggy, but the gold star still shines.